Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Mcleod-Skinner. I'm a proud rural Oregonian who believes in protecting our democracy, and that includes electing good leaders we can trust to serve all Oregonians. My team and I have spent the last couple months helping emerging leaders, especially younger rural and BIPOC candidates, connect with voters. During the last month, that's included providing these live stream forums at least twice a week to give some great candidates a larger forum. Election day is a week from today. And if you've not yet voted in this critically important election, we recommend that you drop off your ballot in a ballot drop box or at the county clerk to make sure it's received by election day. We'll talk about that a little bit in our wrap up, but just wanted to get on to the conversation we're going to be having tonight. So over the past month, our conversations have focused mostly on candidates talking about their vision for their communities. But in this remaining week before election day, we're pivoting to discussions on how we can move forward together after the election, despite the divisions between us. And so today's panel is going to talk about that from a couple different perspectives. And I'm really excited to bring together a group of younger emerging leaders from Central Oregon. So first of all is Emerson Levy, who's an advocate for safer schools and is running for state legislature. Also Scott Schaier, a public safety officer who's running for Deschutes County Sheriff. Melanie Kebler, who focuses on affordability and is running for Bend City Council. Later in the forum, mid-forum, we'll also be joined by someone else running for Bend City Council, Rita Schenkelberg, and she's running for a different seat, but she's also couldn't join us at the beginning, but will join us mid-conversation. And then also someone who I would also love to have in this conversation, but who's prepping for a debate that's taking place at 7 p.m. tonight, is Karina Miller. She's running for state senate in my area of Jefferson County. And we actually bumped this conversation a little bit early tonight so that folks in the Bend area can watch her live debate on KTVZ. And so now let's go on to our forum. So Emerson, Scott, Melanie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Jamie, for having us.
So let's start with a little bit about just you and the office you're running for. And then when Rita joins us, we'll ask her to share that as well. So Em, let's start with you. Talk a little bit tell folks about yourself and the office you're running for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie. And thanks for doing all these forums and giving us the opportunity to amplify our voices and to just keep having more conversations. I really appreciate that and your whole team. So yeah, my name is Emerson Levy and I am running for state legislator, state representative in House District 53. So we call that the donut because it goes all the way around Central Bend, including Redmond, Pomelo, north and northwest parts of Bend, all the way, including all of Sun River. So it's the second largest district. The big diverse district and lots of diverse needs. And we have just run a really issues focused campaign. I know we're going to talk about this, but around school safety, around investment in our schools and helping working families here in Central Oregon. That was our focus even pre-COVID, but now with COVID and the amount of struggle that families are going through, that is really the key and the heart of my campaign, is to address the needs of working families on the state level.
Thank you so much. And I know that you've got some really interesting legislation. It's actually legislation is getting focused on the national level, but you're wanting to bring that to Oregon. So I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later, but really appreciate that that focus that you have, especially being mom myself. And now let's move on to Scott Schaier. Scott, I actually saw the tail end of your debate yesterday with your opponent talking about running for Deschutes County Sheriff, and was really struck by some of the distinctions and also this vision you bring about really bringing community together. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also, some of the aspects that you want to bring to the Sheriff's Office in Deschutes County.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you, Jamie, for hosting this event. I really appreciate being included with this amazing panel. Yes, so my name is Scott Schaier, and I am running for Deschutes County Sheriff. The absolute most important thing is I am a husband and I'm a father. I have twins that are 5 years old that just started kindergarten online this year. So we're all going through that experience together. And I know a lot of people at home are experiencing similar things. So I've been now in Central Oregon for 7 years. My wife and I moved here from the Las Vegas Valley back in 2013 because we wanted to start a family out here. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to do that. What I've seen, I work for the City of Bend Police Department. I've been with them for about 7 years now. And prior to that, I started my career in Las Vegas, and I worked for that agency for about 5 years. And I had the opportunity when I moved here to really refocus and work for probably one of the most progressive and respected agencies in the entire state with the Bend Police Department. And I noticed a stark difference between what it is that we were doing to move ourselves forward and what the sheriff's office was lacking. And I think we see the problems because our sheriff's office has not had a sheriff that has come with an outside perspective in 20 years. It's been homegrown for that long now. And I think that we're just seeing a lack of technology. We're seeing a lack of training that is advanced in what the community expects of us. And we're I believe the third fastest growing county in the United States is the last statistic I heard. So we need to catch up. We need to be a law enforcement agency that is 21st century. We need to be a law enforcement agency that actually works with the community and the diverse community that we're growing into. And I think it's my generation's time to take that step into law enforcement leadership, because I think we bring a different perspective and we look at it as more of a collaborative spirit and actually truly working with the community when it comes to public safety. I say it over and over again. Public safety is not just a law enforcement job. It can't be. It has to be a collective, a group effort with social workers, homeless liaisons, mental health specialists, addiction specialists. It has to be a group effort in order to keep our community safe overall. So that's what I hope to bring. And I'd like to talk a little bit more in depth with it as this conversation goes on.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into that part of our conversation, because the trust breakdown with public safety and some of the challenges we're facing is a huge topic nationwide and here in Oregon as well. And talking through some of the ideas that you have and some of the other folks in our panel on how we can really move forward together on an area where we are very divided right now is I think going to be a key part of this conversation. So thank you for that. And Melanie, something that we actually share is our love for well-designed and well-developed communities. And so I know your focus on affordability and livability is really big. So talk to us a little bit about that and tell us about yourself first.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie, for having me with this great group tonight. So I'm Melanie Kebler. I'm running for position 1 on the Bend City Council. And I'm running because I want to bring my perspective as a career public servant to our council and provide some bold and positive leadership for our challenging times ahead. I actually grew up here in Bend, graduated from Bend High, and then went to school in Michigan and came back to do law school in Oregon. And I started working for the public as a prosecutor, a state prosecutor, first on the coast and then in the Valley. And then I became a victims' rights attorney with the nonprofit Oregon Crime Victims Law Center, where I represented crime victims and provided free legal services to them. And so I ended up moving back here to Bend to raise my young daughter here and to be close to my family. And, my focus as a city councilor will be on our recovery from COVID, of course, but Bend still has issues that we've been facing for a while and we need to plan and prepare for and deal with. And those include making sure our transportation system is safe and connected, making sure we're providing more affordable housing and accessible childcare opportunities for the people that live here and are going to be moving here. And also making Bend a leader in the fight against climate change, which just makes sense with where we are, and I think can also help us grow a local green economy as well. One thing I really want to focus on, and I think will be part of the discussion tonight, is making sure that as Bend grows, that everyone who's here is sharing in that prosperity of that growth, and that we're really a welcoming place for everyone. So I really look forward to speaking further with everybody and getting into the issues here.
Great. And I can say that I know everyone on this call is a parent, and I feel very fortunate when I hear you all speak about having younger kids in school, especially with distance learning. I'm very fortunate our youngest is now in high school. And I realize a whole lot easier when you got someone who can sit down and run themselves through it. So just
can he unmute himself?
Yeah.
You're not tech support? Okay.
Well, he's my tech support sometimes, so it's a whole other level of advantage I have, but just much respect to all of you and that kind of double timing it. And then also just all the parents out there who are having to, and their kids trying to engage in learning this time of distance learning. It's such a challenge. Here in Jefferson County, I'm on the ESD and we're constantly working with that challenge. And so much respect to all the parents out there grappling with those challenges right now. So I mentioned this in the opening, the fact that we are in this time of great divisiveness, and you all as candidates are kind of experiencing it to some degree as well. I appreciate, but the many divides that we have between us are socioeconomic, they're urban rural, they're racial. There's all these challenges that we're facing. And they make it difficult for us, especially the political divide, to work together to address common challenges and to move forward with shared goals. So what are some of the hurdles that you're seeing in your races or in the areas where you're serving or wanting to serve? What are some of the hurdles that we're facing, and how can we overcome them to move forward together to just build a stronger and healthier and more equitable community? And let me just rotate through, I guess, well, Em, let's go ahead and stick with the same order, because then Rita will jump in at the end of the line. So what are some thoughts that you have around this?
You know, anecdotally, just like what we've all maybe experienced in our campaigns, I think speaks to public discourse. I mean, I knew that I would get feedback online. I didn't expect, you know, let's say threats, comments of like George Soros, like that was one I got yesterday. So we're seeing what's happening on the national level in our local politics. I know that I think everyone on here has gotten really difficult messages, you know, from people that are community members. So I think, and when I talk to people, they say it's never been like this. It never was really this bad. And so I think we need to start treating each other like people. And I think that is going to have to be around some things that we can all agree on. And it's going to have to be a collective decision that we kind of change the way that we treat each other, especially in a district like House District 53 that is really, really diverse, diverse viewpoints, diverse needs, and just really setting the example of how we treat each other. I know that's a tall order. I say, let's all get along, which isn't maybe realistic, but I think first acknowledging that it has gotten way out of hand. It's never been really this divisive, especially at the local, and these local campaigns that we're running was typically something more you would see on a national, you know, Senate level. So acknowledging that, like, what's happening nationally is happening locally, and that we need to do better.
Yeah, no, it's quite striking what we are seeing, and it's and I know there's some folks fueling it. There's also some folks who are trying to step in. So what are some of those, Scott, let me go to you next. What are some of are there specific challenges you're seeing beyond what Em shared? And then also, what are some of the things that we can be doing to move forward together? What are some of those steps that we can all take, either that we need to take as a society, as a community, or we can individually take?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Em touched on is true. You know, we're seeing what we traditionally find in national level politics and races, you know, trickling down to, you know, our own backyards. And I think Bend specifically, being one of the fastest growing communities, is seeing it probably more magnified than some other communities are. And, you know, specifically what I'm noticing is I think at the end of the day, everyone's just scared. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic. We don't know when our kids are going to get to go back to school. We don't know if we're going to be able to stay in our rental. We don't know if we're going to be able to provide for our family. So I think everyone's scared. And when we get scared, we're pack animals. We all tend to huddle in groups that we see eye to eye with, and then we lash out at one another. And that's just not a healthy way of living. And, but I understand why people are at the point of being scared and nervous. And one of the things that my campaign has been trying to do from day one is just be that voice of calm and just come in and say, hey, listen, we can work together. There's absolutely nothing we cannot accomplish when we do it together. And that means having very challenging conversations, sitting down in my profession and talking to people who have vastly different ideologies than what I traditionally have as a law enforcement professional, and being able to understand and have an empathetic ear when you sit down and talk to other individuals and hear their perspective. I've had the opportunity to do that a few times with some of our local activist groups, and we both learned from one another. We both took positives away from that conversation. And I think that's what it's going to take. At least I'll speak to Deschutes County. It's going to take that we sit down and we understand we're not as different as we want to believe we are, or as social media would like to believe we are. We all want to just raise a family in a safe environment. We want to be able to walk down the street and know our kids can go ride their bikes and feel safe. And I think we all can get to that point when we have leaders who take it upon themselves and to encourage those conversations from happening, letting people's voices be heard without trying to silence them or intimidate them into not speaking their truth. And that's something that I would hope to be able to do as the next sheriff. But even if I don't end up winning my race, that's something I'm still going to do as a person in our community, because that's where we need to go.
Thank you. And Melanie, as a city councilor, your specific role would be doing some of that work to bring communities together, and some of that, on the ground listening. There's the different roles, the steps of government, where in M's case, yes, it's listening, but it's also going to Salem and being the legislative body versus being the more on the ground, some of those more face-to-face conversations. What are some of your ideas? What are you seeing, and what are some of your ideas on tangible steps we can take to be able to work together and kind of help move us beyond this divide?
Sure. Yeah. I think I'm seeing the same things. And I think what is one of the hurdles of campaigning in this year is that we just can't get together with people like we normally would. We just really can't walk through a neighborhood and knock on a bunch of doors, or have a big party and invite a bunch of people to talk to and really have those face-to-face conversations, which I think does hurt the discourse that tends to happen on social media or online. So I don't think that's helping with sort of the tribalism that Scott has described, to have a lot of our interactions be happening in a space where you're not really able to see or interact with the person that's talking to you. So one of the things that I've been talking about during my race is the idea of public engagement and public comment with your local government. I have been really encouraged by a lot of the activism that has really come to full force this year, has involved turning and looking at your local government, especially folks that want to talk about public safety and policing have come to realize that your local government has a lot of control over that. Your city, your county, it's not the Senate, it's not the US Senate necessarily that's going to make the most difference if you want to see reform, or for issues like housing or transportation, which affect people in their daily lives. What I'd like to do from the city council perspective is see if we can do more reaching out. Instead of expecting folks to come to the scheduled or certain regimented meetings that our government sets up, how can we be creative and go out into the community where people are and get their voices and hear what they are saying and thinking about how their city's working or not working for them? I think that's pretty crucial. And I think in that way you get more of people kind of brought into the fold. You get a little more diverse perspective, and that can help you when you're making solutions and trying to problem solve. So, I'd love to see us, get our city council meeting, held in different places around town once we can hold them in person again, going into schools or churches or parks or even just a neighborhood intersection, to actually just say, hey, we're here, we're here where you are, and we want to listen now and hear from some voices that we haven't traditionally heard from.
Well, thank you for that. And then also, all of you have touched on this, that how social media, in some ways it's helpful getting the word out. I mean, we're right now on social media, but at the same time, it creates a potential environment for so much negativity and that disconnect that people seem to feel, and that, something that someone would never say to your face, but they feel fine kind of, punching it into the comment line kind of thing is really helping to further this divide. I think the point's well taken. Let's
talk about something. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think Melanie's, she already is such a great example of something that she's already doing, that she's not in the office. If you read her Twitter thread of the city council meeting, she's made city council so much more accessible to the community, because it's also very witty and very funny, which I enjoy. But if you can't be there, which most people can't at 7 o'clock on a whatever, look, Melanie is a 3-year-old, Scott has five-year-old twins, I have a 5-year-old. It's very difficult to make happen. But it makes it so accessible that I can sit on the couch after I put my kid to bed and say, like, oh, here's what's happening in my community. And I think that she just is a great example of doing what you say. And she hasn't been elected yet, that she has already made city council more accessible to the people that live here.
Well, no, it's such a great point. I served on a city council back 2004 to 2012, and that was part of the thing we were grappling with then. How do we make council meetings more accessible? And this idea of going online was, a lot of people were poo-pooing at the time. I mean, now with virtual learning, it's something that we've had to transition to. So how do we use it as a tool, but also make it accessible? Because of course, accessibility is always a huge thing in terms of those who can afford it and who have, Wi-Fi and all those pieces. But Em, to your point, being able to do things now while you're even a candidate, you actually are someone who also comes to mind for me on that, because there's school safety legislation that you're working with the sitting legislator to move forward now that will help to make our kids safer in school when and some kids are back in school, but when all of our kids are back in school. So talk to us a little bit about that legislation that you're working to bring to Oregon.
Yeah, I think it's really important legislation. And I guess it's actually a really good segue to talk about how these three offices can work together. So the legislation nationally is called Alyssa's Law, and Alyssa lost her life in the Parkland, Florida shooting. She was shot 10 times through the door. And her mom, Lori, who Jamie and I both have talked with, has used her time and her energy to honor Alyssa through creating an emergency management system called Alyssa's Law. And we really want to bring that to Oregon. And what it is, it's a silent panic alarm, like on your phone, that a teacher or administrator could have, and it's geotagged. So once you leave the school, it would no longer be a functioning place of your location, and it can alert multiple emergency management systems silently. So, and that's the floor. And some schools have gone even further to have automatic locks and other things. So, Alyssa's mom, Lori, says that time is life. And so this buys a lot more time and allows you to act quickly without having to, it just to not have to think very much in an emergency situation. We just can click a button and they will know exactly where you are in the school. So I think it's really common sense legislation, and as our natural natural disasters are happening, there are more reasons why this legislation makes a lot of sense. And so what you do, or how it's been implemented throughout the country, it's in Florida, New Jersey, and it's also pending in a few other states. Is that you bring your school board together, you bring your sheriff's office, your local police, and you kind of create the system together. And there's also been grants to fund it. So I think it's a really great opportunity, and a legislation like this could be a really good opportunity to get something done for families, but also to bring people together that maybe normally wouldn't sit down at the table together and hammer out something that really works for the community. And I think right now we need legislation like that.
Yeah, we can all agree we want to keep our kids safe, right? So it's such a great idea. It honors a tragic loss, but it helps that time is life concept of helping to protect other kids. So Scott, you're in a police department now. How would that work tangibly? If talk us through that process from the perspective of a public safety officer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's a great idea. Anytime that we can save time, like Em just alluded to, life, happens, we can save lives within seconds. And so being with the city agency now, but having good close partnerships is very important with your sheriff's office and your other municipalities in the area. So having a program like that, just to alerting us in a timely manner so we can respond appropriately, and also making sure that our fire partners are involved as well. So we're getting fire resources and life-saving resources heading in the exact same time that we're also responding. So I think it's extremely important. I actually currently serve as a school resource officer with the Benton Police Department. So I'm inside our schools. That's my primary function as of right now. And I think a program like this would be absolutely fantastic. I think the school resource officer program is a hot debate right now amongst the country. But sorry.
This is the beauty of Wi-Fi and Benton being on call and all those other things. So
no.
there we go.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, sorry about that, guys. So it's a debated topic right now, but I think at least for our community, and that's what I'll speak to, I think our school resource officer program is invaluable. I think not only the safety aspect of it, like you had mentioned, Jamie, we want to make sure our kids are safe, but also just building those relationships. We're fortunate in Central Oregon that program really does build relationships with kids and with teenagers. I've had some unbelievable experiences of kids who come from very underrepresented and troubling homes come to me because they trust what we're doing. And I think that's an extremely important tool that we can help just build our community stronger amongst our younger generation. So I think working with legislation, working with city councils, working with county commissioners, all of us sitting down at the table, understanding that no one of us has any more responsibility. We're all in this together. I think that's the approach we need to start taking. Is it's not a hierarchy issue. I'm the sheriff, so I'm the most important one in the room. That's ridiculous. You have to come together and say your part is equally as valuable as my part, and we got to come to work together and do it in a timely manner. One of the things that frustrates me in government is that it takes years to implement great ideas. We have to be able to process things, understand the pros and cons, work through it fiscally, and then start implementing these programs, because I hate to see a tragedy happen and say, well, hey, a year ago we had this great idea and we just dragged our feet on it. So that's one thing I would make sure I do is that when we do come together with life-saving ideas like this, we got to implement them in a timely manner.
Let's get it done. Yeah, especially as Em was saying that there may be some resources available. Melanie, just before I get to you on this, a little clarify for some folks who don't have this sense of police versus sheriff. So I'm going to try this, Scott. Let me know if I've got this right.
Yes.
Most cities, or at least larger cities, have their own police departments that stay within their jurisdictions within the city boundaries, and their funding comes from, and so they're a department under the city. So this is a transition to you, Melanie. And then once you're outside of those areas, or much smaller communities who can't afford their own police department, then has the sheriff's departments. That's why the sheriff's at the county level. For example, where my family lives, just outside Terrebonne, is we are dependent on we're actually over the lines. We're in Jefferson County, but our area is patrolled by the sheriff of Jefferson County as opposed to a police department. And so that some folks get confused on that distinction. So you're talking about municipalities for the police department where you are now, Scott, and you're looking at that county-wide, and that is also that coordination piece you were talking about between the sheriffs and police. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. Nailed it.
All right, good. So then Melanie, then talking about municipalities then, and talk to us ideas you might have on how we can implement or ways to work on this idea of school safety.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I think the city council can, be supportive or can be partners with other local government entities like the school board for sure. I know also I sit on the local public safety coordinating committee, which right now I'm a citizen member, but were I to become a counselor, I'd probably ask to be assigned as the city councilor that sits on that group. And that involves a lot of different local agencies, as well as the municipality, the county, with a general idea of public safety. And this sounds like it fits right into that, purview of keeping kids safe in the community. And especially if it's going to involve coordination with law enforcement groups, that would be something definitely that committee could look at as well. I really am a big believer in kind of bringing people to the table, everyone who's a stakeholder or, a community partner to address a problem, and really having those collaborative meetings so that you can make sure you have everyone sitting there. So if something comes up, someone who has the expertise or a different perspective can really bring that into the conversation. And I think that just helps with problem solving and coming up with good solutions. But I like the way that this legislation would kind of spark that collaborative solution, because I think those last longer than something that's just been sort of top down, placed down onto a local municipality or a local organization. When it sort of comes from the bottom up and from coordination, I think those are going to be better solutions overall.
Great point. Let's stay on talking about municipalities and talk about affordable housing. I know, Melanie, this is something near and dear to your heart. And sorry, the noise in the background. I've got a really obnoxious dog who's just like, oh, bomb in a minute. But she's not settling down. She's more calm in these things. So you talk a bit about affordable housing. I mean, it's such a huge issue throughout our state. Obviously, with the wildfires, it's been made worse. But I'll finish this question. I'm going to mute myself. So what are some of your ideas how we can move forward on developing more affordable housing?
Sure. So Bend, I think everyone in Bend knows we're in a housing crisis. As you touched on, it's a state problem. It's a national problem for a lot of places in our country. So the real problem is we don't have the homes here for the people that are frankly living here or want to live here or are going to move here. And the biggest issue here is that Bend is an amazing place to live. And this is one thing that I can say for a lot of people that we can connect on. We love living here because of the environment, because of the way we can go and do so many different things from this place, because of the weather for some people. I do love the weather here, but, I think it's just an attractive place to live. And then especially it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with COVID and working from home and it becoming maybe even a more attractive place to kind of, if you can work anywhere, why wouldn't you come here to Bend? So we have to face the reality that that's happening, and we have to really work to build enough homes and enough homes of different types for different types of people. I think that's one of the problems that we've been seeing, is that our average home price is going up and up and up. And what we're seeing mostly in Bend historically have been single family homes. And that's not for everybody. Different people have different needs. Multifamily housing is really important. We've got important state legislation to help us create more things like duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. And the city is going to be the one that implements that code. And so I think the way that we implement the code to make sure that we can build those houses and those homes without too much red tape, without too much barriers, so that developers just don't end up building them, that's going to be on the city side of things, is really to encourage and incentivize that type of home building. And it's not just for people to make a profit, it's so people can be housed in our community. And that's also a way to start making, I just observed at our last city council meeting, they were discussing solutions to some folks that have been camping in what's called the Juniper Ridge property in the north part of town. And the city's going to start moving forward with a managed camp. But the refrain throughout that conversation was, we just don't have enough homes for our unhoused neighbors. It is not just someone who has a mental illness or who has, had terrible things happen to them in life. These are people that just, for some reason, could not, hard times, COVID or whatever it was, they just can't make their rent in Bend because of the housing crisis. And that's why they have to sleep in their car, right? So building more homes is a way to bring our housing affordability to where we want it to be, and also help our neighbors that are unhoused. And I think it's a top priority for our city, and something that we have to work really hard at in the next few years.
I greatly appreciate that. Also the fact that, and this was, I haven't looked at the statistic recently, but I remember looking at this a year or two ago when we saw that almost half of the folks who were unhoused were kids. And so there's so many levels of challenge that we're facing. And then also for economic development as well. And just on this, hey, Rita, glad you could join us. We're just wrapping up a conversation on affordable housing. And I know there was legislation that went through just recently at the state level. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was good and important legislation. And, I think I wanted to speak on something that Melanie was saying as well, that the need is for people to be housed. I actually I back up to Juniper Ridge, and I can absolutely tell you that there are a lot of young 20-year-olds that live back there, and that there's been an increase. There's a pretty far distance, but it's a lot of young kids, a lot of teenagers. But also when we're talking about affordable housing, and I think it's important to talk about strategic planning, because I think there's a big argument to say that everything that's zoned as EFU land isn't farmland and we should just build. But I say this over and over, that's how cities go broke. When you have so much rural sprawl that you have not thought about your strategic planning, you are left with roads that you have to pay for on their long-term liability, and that's an unfunded liability. So if we just keep building, we've created more housing, but we've actually just made ourselves go broke. So I think we need to be really strategic. I know that, my opponent just wants to build, he doesn't want the UGB or land use to be in play. And, my thought on that is that we can build, but we need to build responsibly. We can increase UGB, but responsibly, in a way that looks at the state and the city's bottom line that makes sense. Because there's a lot that we can do that people can get housed without creating a lot of unfunded liabilities.
Well, thanks for that. And we were talking before about some of that political divide. I want to point out that it's the late Tom McCall, Governor McCall, who really championed the land use process we have in place. And it's really the envy of many states because it does prevent sprawl. Now, that said, as someone who lives in a rural area and loves living in a rural area, there is that divide in different ways of living and different opportunities that are there. But Melanie, also to your point earlier, is that some of those different housing types, also some of the cluster developments also allow for more open space. So we can't, that building up rather than out is a real opportunity they're seeing in Bend right now. So let me just welcome Rita. And we mentioned earlier that you'd be joining us a little bit later. Your colleagues started out by taking just a minute or two to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their focus areas. Why don't you start with this, and then we'll jump into one of the other questions that we've had lined up. So welcome, Rita.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie, for having me, and sorry about being a little late. And hey, everyone, it's nice to see your faces. 1 week left. So for everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Rita Schenkelberg. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And I'm running for Bend City Council position 4. I'm 29 years old and a renter here in Bend. And I just learned about City Council and really learned about the policies here in Bend that we're implementing and how to make those policies more equitable for all of the people that live here. And as a renter, and you all just already talked about affordable housing, so probably touched on a lot of those points, but it's just so incredibly important that we make affordable housing not only increase the amount that we have, but also make it sustainable for all of the people that already live here. I think that's a really important point that we need to make. Also, being a queer person of color, bringing that aspect of community to Bend City Council, allowing different voices to be heard at the table, and we make actionable plans connected to those communities' voices. And often in a lot of communities of color, we've never had a seat at the table. We've never had engagement in this manner or been part of Bend's leadership. And so getting really, really excited about that and excited about bringing kind of a new perspective. And then last but not least, transportation. How do we make those roads safe for people who are walking to work and people who are biking to work and rolling to work and, you know, maybe not to work, but maybe kids getting to school. And we do that in a way that gets people out of their cars, on their bikes, on their feet, and do it in a way that's sustainable for Bend instead of in a way that, you know, breaks down, that creates a bigger divide between whether you drive a car, whether you ride a bike, you know, bringing us together and giving people options, which is what I think everyone comes to Bend for that. And I know as someone who likes to walk and ride my bike, I love it almost all year round, except when we get those snowmageddons. It's super, super fun to feel the crisp autumn air or feel the warmth of the summer sun on my face. And so really hoping to bring some of those topics to Bend City Council and continue to move them forward with Melanie. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll note that while you're both running for city council, you are running for different seats. And so folks are curious about that. We've been talking about a couple different topics: school safety, affordable housing. We were also talking earlier, and Scott, you raised this, talking about some of the great divides we have around public safety. So Rita, we've had some lighter conversations just when you happen to join. We're jumping into so sorry about that. But so, you know, one of the great divides we're now experiencing is around public safety. And so public taxpayer dollars are spent on our police and sheriff departments who are entrusted to protect us. But that trust has been broken down for some folks, and some folks don't feel safe from those or with those who are entrusted to protect us. And in not feeling that those concerns being heard or addressed, that's resulted in a public outcry. We're seeing protests and a voice to make sure that is heard and that is seen, that lack of feeling of safety. And that public outcry itself has then resulted in backlash. So this is one of the great areas of divisiveness right now. So Scott, let me start with you on this. How can we ensure both public safety and public safety?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I've said it before, I think we're at a point now as a society where we need to renegotiate the social contract when it comes to what law enforcement's role in the community is. I can tell you, as a 12-year now police officer for 2 different agencies, the overwhelming majority of law enforcement professionals are hardworking, empathetic, family people who want to truly give back to their community. They're raising their own families here and they want to be a part of that. I feel that what we can do to improve the current relationship is just being more willing to have those conversations, being more open. Transparency is a huge thing in our profession. We're not always going to get it right. We are going to make mistakes because we're human beings, and we need to have the humility as a profession to own those mistakes and realize when we do make them, how we can learn from them, how we can hold one another accountable to it, how the community can hold us accountable to it. And I think a lot of the ways that we can do that is, one of the ways we're going to do it in the sheriff's office is through actual strategic planning. We're going to have an actual plan in place. That's something that the current sheriff's office, and I'll just speak for local Deschutes County Sheriff's Office, hasn't had in place now for 16 years. And I think when we actually bring the community to that table to be a part of creating what it is that the expectations that we all have of one another, both what our expectations are of our partners and one another and what the community's expectations are of us, we can then actually create a plan that we all have understanding and we all have buy-in. That includes our entire staff as well as our community. Then we'll make that public. We'll make it so that it's available through our website. So you can actually hold us accountable to it, hold me accountable to it as the sheriff, and say, hey, this is what the goals were. This is what you said you were going to get us to. And how can we all together get there? I mentioned it earlier before you jumped in, Rita, about community safety has to be a collective effort. It has to be a community-wide effort, and it has to be met collaboratively. One of the hashtags going around right now that I'm not a huge fan of, but the defund the police hashtag, I think the root idea behind it makes a lot of sense. We need to reallocate funding that traditionally goes to law enforcement and give it back to other social services, whether that's to housing, whether that's to mental health, addiction services. We have to be willing to come together. And once again, I use the word humility a lot because I think that's something that our profession has lacked over the years. And we need to humble ourselves to say we can't fix everything. Law enforcement has been asked to fix all of society's problems, and it's not sustainable. We can't do that. So I think coming together and actually having those other professionals at the table to figure out how we're going to get to where we want to get to, that's kind of the overall theme. And I'll touch on this real fast. Is kind of my passion, I guess, if you will, is mental health. I think one of the reasons that there's a huge divide between law enforcement and communities nationwide is this. Our profession, we deal with trauma on a daily basis. My partners and I, we deal with either direct trauma or vicarious trauma every single shift, 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. And we have never been, as a profession, trained on how to properly manage that trauma. So what we have done in order to cope with that is we dehumanized people, because that's the only way we've ever been able to compartmentalize that trauma that we're experiencing, that we've never been trained on how to deal with appropriately. So we have now dehumanized the public. Well, in turn, the public now dehumanizes us. When I show up on a call, I'm not Scott. I'm an entity. I'm a thing. So I think one of the things that we can do as a profession on our end is properly train officers and deputies how to deal with mental health and how to deal with trauma in a healthy manner. I think once we get that in place through wellness programs, we're seeing them pop up all over the country with unbelievable results. We're less force response. Officers are injured less sick time is being used, which is saving tax money. We're getting less complaints. It's an unbelievable return on investment in these programs. So by implementing something like that, my hope and my vision is that we now will learn how to rehumanize the public, because we have been able to properly manage that stress and that trauma. And then in turn, we are now humanized again. There's lots of other ways that we can get more involved with the community and be partners with different organizations and groups, if nothing more than just to sit and listen. We don't always have to have a speaking role when we show up to these different meetings and organizational events. Just walking with people in our community and just engaging with them to rehumanize one another, I think, is how we fix that divide.
Thank you for that. There's so much what you said resonates so much and is so powerful. When I mentioned before that I served on a city council, and at that time I went through the Citizens Police Academy. And it was a really powerful experience for me, because in going through essentially some drills and some, what if kind of scenarios, it never occurred to me that for a police officer, every single stop could be life-threatening for you as an officer. So having to prepare yourself for that, to be able to expect and deal with anything that could happen. And so there's that experience from the police officer side. Obviously, then from the members of the public, you are entrusted with weapons and with force and with the ability to, and also the responsibility to protect us. So to the expectation that no matter what the situation is, you respond correctly, you read it exactly right, and you respond exactly right. And that is the expectation of officers. And then also, obviously, dealing with things like systemic racism and all the layers of issues we have within communities. So we do have this impasse that we're at, but the training piece that you talked about, I think, is really powerful. In the city I was in, there was the chief really focused a lot on training, and typically in areas where kind of had twice as much training as the bare minimum. And that, I think, really helped for those community relationships, and to make sure that officers read the situation correctly, and more times than not, and then responded appropriately. The other point that you've mentioned, and I heard this from sheriffs really across our state, when I would ask, if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing you would do? It was always talking about mental health and the resources to deal with. So that is, as an officer, you are put in that situation. So we need to figure out, as our communities, we are either going to train you to deal with it, or we're going to put that responsibility in someone else's hands, so that's dealt with appropriately. And this often comes down to the city level. So let me go first to you, Melanie, and then to Rita. What are some of your thoughts on what we can be doing at the municipal level? Then, Em, if you have any thoughts about the state level for legislation. But what are some of the ideas that, your response to Scott's comments, and what are some things we could be doing here in Bend or in Central Oregon?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I had a conversation with Scott a couple weeks ago where he talked about the, the trauma that officers go through, and that really resonated with me as well. Working as a prosecutor within the criminal justice system, and DAs get exposed to trauma and vicarious trauma as well. And just understanding also from working with crime victims about what trauma does to the brain and how it can affect people. So I understand, that point, and I think that is a good one to focus in on the kind of officer self-development side and taking care of those folks that are supposed to be taking care of us. I'm going to do a quick shout out to Phil Chang, who's running for county commission, because when we're talking about mental health resources, which I absolutely am behind, rethinking completely how we respond to mental health crisis in the country generally, in our city, in our county. The county controls a lot of the resources that are put into our county behavioral and mental health, opportunities and services. And so we need great leaders at that level as well to partner with cities and the sheriff's office to create some of these new programs that are doing well, I think, when they're piloted, where we don't need someone with a gun to respond to a mental health crisis. And I think that really helps us to avoid tragedy. One thing I'll give an example on the city level that might be interesting to look into is reducing the amount of traffic stops we have that have officers involved. And we can do that with perhaps some investment or piloting some speed cameras and red light cameras that are actually can do some bit of traffic and law enforcement without creating that situation that you mentioned, Jamie, where you have someone who has to stop a car, get into an officer with a gun, and then they have to kind of be ready for anything. And we also know historically that whether it be explicit or implicit bias, people of color tend to be stopped more or, treated differently during traffic stops than people who are white. So I think that's another way to kind of get at that problem too. But that's one thing that I think we could look at on the city level, is exploring that as an idea of reducing those officer interactions and also freeing up officers to work on other types of cases rather than, pulling people over or watching a red light.
Well, and also all the training you're talking about. So working through, I mean, every profession, every level of government really needs to lean into this opportunity to better understand our own implicit bias and to understand how it impacts us. I mean, we were all creatures of habit. We all have bias. It's something that we learn, we learn as kids growing up. We were talking earlier about education, and those reaction pieces is something that we all naturally learn. And we live and are raised in communities that are, have a history of being racist and homophobic and anti-Semitic and all these things. So having that as our experiences and learning that without realizing consciously that we're learning it, it's something that we're all having to grapple with to make sure we're truly are creating a level playing field. I also really appreciate your shout out for Phil Chang, because he brought on this into the conversation in his race, talking about mental health and that piece of our public safety and our social fabric. And it's not something that you typically hear county commissioners running talk about, but it was just for him, not only his natural resource background, but also in talking about this needed to be a priority. And it does tie in with public safety. It does tie in with all these other layers. So thanks for mentioning that as well. Rita, other thoughts on things at the city level we can do to address public safety and public safety?
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for sharing. I am a mental health therapist that actually works with youth on probation and parole. And so I'm kind of like on the other end of both you and Melanie. So I think that it's very interesting that we're all on this call right now. And I actually worked as an intern at Deschutes County Behavioral Health for a year. And so I've actually been in that county system and kind of seen some of the county's resources for mental health, and that we have the amazing mobile crisis team that can support in a lot of those I'm missing the word at this current moment, but to respond to those incidents when we need mental health support. But aside from all of that, from the city level, I think it's incredibly important that we have a committee that's having conversations with Ben PD. To have people of color be able to have a voice when they are talking to Ben PD and actually give them direct feedback on things that they are doing and they aren't doing that create that fear factor, I think is incredibly important. I think that, as Scott kind of said, that humility piece of, yes, police officers have a very stressful and traumatic job, and it's their job, and people of color, this is just our lived life. aside from me running for Bend City Council, like I'm a person of color. And so if my face isn't on this screen, like I'm just another person of color in Bend, and the way that I'm treated is markedly different. And so I think that whole conversation about implicit bias and getting all of those trainings in with Bend PD and Deschutes County Sheriff is incredibly important. And those are a lot of really, really hard conversations. And as a therapist, I love that. And I bet from a law enforcement standpoint, that's something that could be pretty scary, for lack of a better term. And that those hard conversations do create stress and can be quite difficult. And that is how we're going to change the system that has historically oppressed people of color, queer people, and just so many other groups that really need support from police and usually are in more dangerous situations more often. And so the resources that the police have could actually be more supportive, but because the system has worked against us for so long, we don't feel safe seeking it out. And so then it gets kind of lost. So that's just a little bit.
Yeah. So if Jamie, if I can respond to that. So, and I appreciate you, Rita. I've never lived your experience, so I can't pretend that I've ever understood where you're coming from on that. Humility is the word I use over and over again. We understand, or let me rephrase that. I understand that these conversations are going to be challenging. They're going to hit home. They're going to hit hard. That's okay. As long as when we're sitting down at the table with one another, we can give each other that grace. We can listen empathetically and hear what exactly it is we're trying to accomplish together, and understanding that change doesn't happen immediately, right? We talk about policy changes. We talk about training, implement different training within law enforcement agency. That stuff is fantastic. That's day one. Right? That's when we start the change, because whenever we implement a new policy or a new training regimen or anything of that nature, or a new philosophy, the end goal is to change cultural behavior. That's the end goal. But our community has to be able to give a little bit of grace to law enforcement to say, we get this. It's not going to happen overnight. When we ask you on Monday, it's not going to be different on Tuesday, but it needs to start. I think what we've experienced in our community with the protests is it's shined lights on things that a lot of people pretend didn't exist here. And now we understand it does. So now we can actually come to the table, and what it has done to this point is it's created a moment for us to all sit down together as leaders, both formal and informal, to say, what is it we're going to do to move forward? I truly believe we have the opportunity in Deschutes County wide to be the beacon, to be the example of what every other community in America should thrive to be, because we're not bogged down with a lot of issues that larger cities have to deal with. We can be innovative. We can have a different vision that we can actually accomplish. And one last thing, and I'm sorry I'm talking so much about this, we talk about training. Implicit bias training is extremely important that we do on an annual basis, so that we're fresh, we're at the tip of the spear of whatever training it is. And I believe those trainings should be led by BIPOC owned and led companies. And with that, we also have to address the mindset of law enforcement. So if I'm elected sheriff, one of the things that I will advocate for in Salem will be to our training facility. So we have a statewide training facility that all law enforcement officers in the state of Oregon go through. And one of the things I want to make sure that we're implementing is changing that mindset from the warrior mentality that we've been grown up in to a guardian mentality. And that goes back to, we are part of the community. We are just another thread of the community. And we want to walk with the community, talk with the community, sit with the community. That is what we do. We have decided as a profession that we will take on that role, that we will run towards gunfire when we hear it. We won't run away from it. And that is that guardian mentality. But when we're not facing that danger, we are just another part of the community as any other member is. And I think that is the way that we really shift the way law enforcement and communities interact with one another, is the mindset of how we go from our basic training on.
You know, that talking about that cultural shift is so critically important. And also, Scott, you raised this, it's like one thing to say, okay, now we realize it's there. Now we got to do something about it. Now, I know there's a lot of folks in the community who will say, wait a minute, you just realize there's something that's there. That's an issue. But now that we're at that point, there is no going back and there is no denying. Now is that point that challenges us all to step forward. And the fact that it will be a cultural shift. I mean, for all of us in many ways, but also for, you know, I've just in terms of the learning I've been doing in understanding some of that key training component. And granted, you do have to get into a certain frame of mind to run towards gunfire. But at that same point, that shift between a warrior, which is more aggressive, versus a guardian, which is protective, is a very profound, different take, and will impact, you know, those subconscious actions that you take. So I really appreciate that distinction. We're running close on time. Is there anything you want to add to this? But then I want to shift. I have a specific question for Rita, because she didn't have much time earlier in our conversation, but anything to add to this?
I'll be super fast. I think just having the conversation that we're having right now is conversations that aren't happening right now, and with the current people that hold these spots. And I think it shows what we could do. What everyone here is presenting is not one way or the other. It's a both and we're asking our city and our state and our police not just to be good, but to be great. And I think that's what all of us have in common, is we want greatness. We don't just want things to be okay. And I think under new leadership, that, like Scott was saying, we cannot just be good or okay, but we can be innovative, we can be great, and we can be the place that people look to, both as a city, state, and police sheriff's program.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Rita, I wanted to ask this specifically of you because it's about language and words that we use. And I can say that, having traveled in the last couple of years, tens of thousands of miles across our state and listened to Oregonians across those divides, I know that we have many shared values and aspirations for our families. And one of my greatest takeaways in the conversations I've had with folks across the political spectrum is a realization that sometimes we literally have to translate words so that we can focus on their meaning. And important concepts are sometimes lost because people get caught up on words. I know one of the words you use, and it's being used a lot right now by a lot of folks, is intersectionality. Because some folks aren't familiar with that word, we're missing an opportunity to talk about some really important ideas. So I first want to ask if you would define that word for us. What does intersectionality mean?
Intersectionality to me definitely means that there's a cross section in almost every single subject that we're talking about right now. And within that intersection, there are many different layers. And when we're talking about intersectionality, we're talking about each layer of that intersection, and that really brings to light kind of all of these different topics and perspectives that we have. And so when we talk about intersectionality as a whole, it's looking at all of the perspectives and how we bring all of those perspectives together. And it's kind of the same concept of like bringing all of the voices together.
So kind of like the conversation we were just having about public safety. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so your platform focuses on economic development, transportation, and managing growth. So give us an example of intersectionality related to economic development.
So a lot of the conversations and feedback I've received from the public and from other leaders in town is talking about economic growth. And so as a mental health therapist and as a wildly active activist here in town, I have a lot of conversations with BIPOC individuals as a BIPOC individual. And so they're like, oh, what about economic development? What about jobs? What about COVID? And the reality is when we're looking at economic development, when we create a safe place for BIPOC individuals to live and be, that will make a healthier economy here in Bend. That will give humans the freedom to open their businesses, to have conversations, to build relationships with other business owners, and uplift the economy, which in turn will uplift the BIPOC community. When we kind of only create economic growth from like a white perspective or this specific perspective, we're leaving all of these people out of the table. I was having a conversation with a friend on Saturday, and it's like 30% of the individuals that are part of the Bend Chamber are Latinx individuals. There needs to be a conversation about that. That's a huge percentage of the Bend Chamber. And so having conversations about what the Latinx business owners are facing, with the conversations about ICE, with the conversations about the police. You know, when we're having all of those conversations, we're going to uplift those businesses, which will make the economy more healthy for everyone. It's not just going to help that one business, it's going to uplift everyone, which is in such a huge part of kind of the fear with COVID and the pandemic happening right now.
So rebuilding a strong economy in a nutshell. God, I think that works for everyone. So thank you for that. Thank you for making that connection for folks on that. So we are out of time, almost out of time. Thank you all for a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. And wanted to just ask briefly, how do people, you're all also candidates right now, so people can vote for you right now. How do people find out more about you? What's your website? And let's go around. Em, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me. Please vote. We're begging you to vote. We really, to win, we have to have a high turnout, and we need you to vote. You can go to emersonvotes.com, and all my social media is Emerson4OR.
Great, thank you. And people are seeing the opportunity by just listening to you all. Scott, what's your website and how do people learn more about you?
Yes, thank you. So Scott, that's my name is Scott. That's good. It's Schaier for Sheriff, and my name is Schaier, a little tricky, for sheriff.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram as well. And I just want to say thank you for all of you who've tuned in today, who are taking a part in educating yourself before you do cast your vote. I always encourage everyone, vote for someone that you believe have similar values to you, because I believe that's the core of it. When we have the similar values, we can overcome any problem that's placed in front of us. It's just we all need to be making sure that we're working towards the same goals. So Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And that cuts beyond it goes beyond party affiliation. It's about those values and voting for a great candidate. Melanie, your website.
Yeah, so it's melaniekebler.com. And I'm also on social media. If you just plug my name in, you'll find me there. And happy to answer any questions folks have. You can email me through my website or contact me on social media. And yes, as Emerson said, please vote. And it's too late to mail your ballot now, so you need to go put it in the Dropbox. And
I'll make that plug at the end.
Yes, please do that. I'll
Rita,
let you do that.
Rita, your website.
It's ritaforbend.org, and then you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Rita for Bend, and then you can also email me at ritaforbend@gmail.com. And please, I agree, please vote. We want those votes in the drop boxes. If you have questions, comments, concerns about voting, please reach out to one of us. We would love to answer those questions and make sure that your ballot makes it in those drop boxes.
And you've all just taken away my grand finale, but I'll say it one more time. Election day is Tuesday. So if you haven't yet voted, yes, be an informed voter and research your candidates. And every race is important. That's also, yes, people are focusing on the presidential race, but school board races are important. City council races, the sheriff's race, very important. And we talked about that today. So every race is important. The water board's important. Drop off your ballot. It's getting too late to mail it. Postmarks do not count. It has to be received by election day. So the best thing to do at this point through election day is drop it off at a designated ballot box, drop box for your ballot. And lastly, your vote is your voice. And this is such an important time for all our voices to be heard. So get out there and vote. Thank you all for joining us, and make sure you vote, folks.